written extensively about, which is power. And not just power, but also seduction, which you've written extensively about. And of course, you've written about finding one's purpose. So tell me if the framework that I've just given myself liberty to create is an accurate one. And if it's not, I'm hoping that it's not in perhaps some interesting ways. So to me, you talk about, and we will talk about, power as a resource. It's something that it's there as a resource. It could be used or not used. And I think of seduction as one form of exchange between an individual. So there's a verb associated with seduction. Power, I'm thinking of more as a noun in this context. You're the word guy. And then, purpose is really about finding like to what end or ends one is going to devote power, seduction, and the other forces that allow human beings to interact with each other in the world. But power as a resource that can be expressed in different ways and accessed in different ways. Maybe we could just explore that a little bit, because, when we hear the word power, I think a lot of people kind of brace themselves, like, here we go, someone's going to try and have power over me. This is about manipulation, and so on and so forth. But I learned pretty early on that every career endeavor, there are power dynamics. There's mentor-mentee. There are teachers and their students, and both have power. In romantic relationships, there's a power exchange. There are yeses and there are nos. There are maybes. There are covert and overt contracts.
Yeah.
I'll do this because I want to.
Right.
You'll do this because you want to. Great. Sounds great. Overt contract. There are also covert contracts. Well, I don't feel safe doing that. So what I'll do is I'll take something from the interaction that you're not aware of, so that I can sort of ease my sense of danger and give myself the illusion of feeling safe, and all sorts of kind of complicated human dynamics that have to do with us having this forebrain thing that can do all of that gymnastics. So maybe we could start very simply by just saying, how would you define power in terms of its functional definition, like in interpersonal relations? And then why do you think power is so essential to all relationships? That's really what I'd like to get to. Why is it so essential? Why couldn't it be something else?
Well, the way I define power is I try and take it away from that kind of negative context that most people have and that you brought up. And I bring it to something very primitive and very primal. The way the human being is wired, the feeling that we have no control over our environment, and in the earliest period, it was literally over our environment and wild animals and nature and the climate, etc. But now the sense that you have no control over your career, over your children, over your parents is deeply, deeply immiserating. And it compels us to act in certain ways, either attempts to find positive ways of power or doing what you call covert ways of getting power, passive-aggressive. Traditionally, passive-aggressive means. So it's deeply wired in us to want a degree of control over the immediate environment and immediate events. We can never have complete control, and the idea of having complete control is nonsense, and it would actually be very ugly, because you want a degree of letting go and letting circumstances come to you, et cetera, et cetera. So the sense of you want to feel like, with other people and relationships, that you can influence them, that you can move them in a certain direction, either to get you to love you and treat you better, or either to stop annoying, irritating behaviors, or either to, wake up and find and do productive activity if it's your children, et cetera. You want to have the ability to influence people, to move them in a certain direction, either in your interest or in their interest, right? And once you have that need, and every single human being who's ever lived has that need, and we often don't recognize it because we're embarrassed by it. We're embarrassed by our desire for power, for our need to control. Every human being has it, right? And it's not easy because human beings are complicated. If you say, do this, and you're talking to your son, he'll do the opposite, or he'll do something else. You can't just force people in a direction, right? By being overt and telling them this is what you need to do, you create resentment, you create an enemy. They may say, yes, daddy, yes, husband, I'll do what you say. but they're going to resist you deep down inside, right? So people are tricky. They wear masks. They pretend to say one thing and they do another. They have their egos, and you inadvertently wound their egos or trip them in some way, and they react in a way that you don't expect. And so power is this kind of invisible realm that envelops society, where people are continually battling each other and struggling in it, but no one is like talking about it. No one's being overt about it. No one's saying, this is exactly what I'm trying to do. And so when you enter the social world and the career world, you're not expecting these battles. You don't know, no one's taught you, no one's trained you. Your parents don't train you. Nobody trains you. And you make mistakes, and you realize how political people are. If you're a sharky character, and there's a certain percentage of them, you realize, wow, I can deceive people, I can manipulate them, I can get what I want, I can pretend to love them, and they'll fall for me, and I can do all this other stuff. But for most of us, the 95% of us who aren't sharks, and I'm including myself in that category, it's very, very disturbing to suddenly enter that world and see all of that invisible power games on that no one's given you any advice for or helped you. And so take it out of the realm of it's just about trying to dominate the world and manipulate and exploit and abuse. It's something inside of you. You have this need, and your suppression of it will only make you come out in passive ways, and you won't be able to control certain things. If you want to move people, if you want them to follow your ideas, if you want them to be more aligned with your politics or your ideas, you have to be subtle. You have to learn psychology. You have to learn certain aspects of how to almost move people without them realizing in certain directions, which is like the art of seduction. And if you're not interested in that, if you're just going to tell people what you think and what you're going to do, that means you're not interested in practical action. You're not interested in results. You're just interested in venting your own frustrations or your own anger. So learning the subtle little dynamics of power is extremely essential because we're a social animal. It doesn't mean that you're going to get dirty, that you're going to suddenly go out there and manipulate the hell out of people. Most of the 48 laws of power is about defense, but how to defend yourself from the sharks about there, how to defend yourself from making classic mistakes, like outshining the master, like talking too much, like arguing with people instead of demonstrating your ideas, on and on and on. It's not an ugly thing. It actually makes you a better social individual. So that's how I like to frame it.
It's very interesting. I think as a young guy growing up, it was so important to me to know where I fit in with my friend group. And I didn't think of it so much as a hierarchy, nor when I was in my academic studies did I think of it as a hierarchy, even though it clearly was, right? So much as the goal was to figure out where was my unique slot that I could do the most good for myself and others.
Right.
You know, kind of finding my spot. I don't want to say on a shelf because it gives an image of something vertical, but you know, let's make it lateral, lateral arrangement of different people with different strengths, different life purposes, trying to figure them out. You know, where should I be in order to express that and also feel connected to others? And in order to do that, I realize now, based on your answer, I did have to figure out, who's trying to have power over, who's pretending that they don't want power but is actually exerting power, these sorts of things. And there's an incredible peace that comes from knowing that one is in the correct place, both profession, interpersonally, in relation to oneself, but also in the context of one's peer group. It's kind of knowing, this is where I belong. Because trying to gain power when one is trying to move to a position that isn't right for them or in a way that isn't right for them just seems so energetically costly.
Yeah.
It seems like a waste of a life, frankly.
Right.
Trying to gather resources simply to have them, to give the illusion of power, but then being afraid of losing them just sounds like a recipe for misery, as you pointed out.
Yeah.
Whereas figuring out where am I most powerful in the benevolent sense of the word, that seems like a good pursuit.
Well, it's connecting up to mastery again and finding your life's purpose. I knew when I was young that I couldn't exert physical power because I was a skinny little runt, and I wasn't bullied, but people would kind of pick on me, et cetera, et cetera. So I veered towards intellectual pursuits where I could have power. And in the end, you might have been a jock and you might have done well in high school, but look at me now. I'm not saying that it's a beautiful thing, but that's part of human nature, the desire to actually, prove yourself and find that niche that you belong to, so you don't have that kind of that sense of inferiority, which Alfred Adler, the psychologist, describes very eloquently. So a lot of it is kind of compensating when you're a child for things that are your weaknesses and finding what you're so good at that you do have that power and people can't bully you, right? And you're like now a famous neuroscientist, whereas they're like, who knows what they're doing kind of thing. So power definitely is connected in some way to that inner sense of what you were meant to do. And you feel it with the ease and the connection that comes from it, right? So I can honestly say that my dislike of working for other people and office politics and egos, I now have an existence where I don't have to deal with any of that. And I'm so blessed, and I wake up every morning and I pray to God, thank God I found this, because it's the perfect lifestyle for me.
And can be accurately described as an intellectual beast. So it's which is like a compliment, right? We hear the word beast and we think a ferocious beast trying to harm others. But
I'm happy being a beast.
Yeah, and so I think finding where we can be a beast, and for some people that's painting or gardening or whatever it might be. I think is again ties back to these issues of or this quest for mastery. Seduction is also a very loaded word, right?
It's even more uglier than power.
Because seduction, right? Seduction kind of drips with the idea that somebody is tricking someone else into doing something that they otherwise would not want to do. But seduction is both our propensity to do it and to have it done to us is hardwired into our nervous system and has a lot to do with the hypothalamus and a bunch of other areas that I won't bore us with the nomenclature. But seduction, to me, implies some sort of exchange. I suppose we could seduce ourselves through denial or convincing ourselves that of something. But more often than not, when we talk about seduction, we're talking about an interaction between two or more people. So what are some of the core principles of seduction? And if you care to play anthropologist a bit and a neuroscientist, I would invite that. Why do you think we have neural circuits in our brain that allow us to seduce and be seduced?
Well, I don't know how if I'm being kind of an armchair intellectual here, but my theory is some of it has to go back to social events long in our prehistory, which have to do with taboos. And society was initially kind of organized by a series of taboos, right? Most notably the taboo on incest. And what happened, this is just not my theory, it's the theory of the Malinowski is that I pronounce it, is that the moment a taboo enters the human brain, like you're not supposed to sleep with this woman, the desire arises inside of you to actually sleep with that woman. The sense of no, the sense that this is prohibited, stirs the desire, stirs the contrary impulses in humans. And we can be very, perverse creatures, right? So if you've ever tried to suppress a thought, you realize that it keeps coming up. It keeps coming up. You can't suppress it. Don't think of an elephant, Andrews. Whatever you do, don't think of an elephant. You're thinking of it because you can't help it, right? The idea that you're not supposed to desire this person stirs that actual desire. So I believe the sense of something being taboo and transgressive is the ultimate kind of origin of our desire for seduction. But seduction involves vulnerability. It involves somebody gets inside, somebody gets under our skin, right? And to do that, we have to let them in. So the person being seduced is in some ways, to a degree, complicit. Because if you just put up a wall and you said, no, I'm not going to be seduced, nothing will happen. But you have a vulnerability. You're letting that person into your psyche, into your inner space. The paradigm for that is early childhood. So Freud talks a lot about this. So I don't know if people still believe in Freud anymore.
I certainly do.
Okay.
Absolutely.
But
Genius of both psychology and physiology. Wrong
sure.
about a lot of things, did a lot of things he shouldn't have done. Let's acknowledge that. I think everyone would agree that sleeping with your patients and being a cocaine addict, bad ideas. But at the same time, he had an absolute, like near supernatural levels of insight and brilliance into human nature.
Did he sleep with his patients?
I believe he did. But if I just threw that on him without him doing it, then, forgive me.
He certainly had emotional attachments to his patients that he shouldn't have had. I don't know if he slept with them. He very well might have. But his idea was that the child is seduced by the parent. You're in an extremely vulnerable position, right? Your life depends on them. And they're seducing you with their energy. You're letting them in, right? And that kind of creates a pattern for the rest of your life. And so, for instance, the feeling of being carried by your father and just being taken around physically is a form of seduction because you don't know what he's going to do to you. You're very excited. You want that surprise, right? And to me, it's related to the seduction of a story. Stories are very seducing to us. We don't know where they're taking us. We don't know what the next chapter is, what's going to happen to this character or not. The surprise lowers our resistance and opens our mind up to what's going to happen next, is a form of seduction. Fairy tales, the stories you were reading as a child, your interactions with your parents, they're deeply, deeply ingrained in you. You cannot be seduced unless you are vulnerable, right? And so I like to switch it around and get out of the negative connotations. Being vulnerable is actually a positive trait. I think a lot of people now in the world today, because things are so harsh and invasive, that people have become too invulnerable. They don't want to let anything in, right? And this now infects their relationships with other people. They don't want to be influenced. They want to be strong inside of themselves. They're afraid of giving in to the other person, of surrendering to their influence. But it's actually a delightful feeling to surrender to the power of another person and then reverse that charge and have them surrender to your power. So when I'm reading a writer, and sometimes they completely seduce me, like Friedrich Nietzsche is one of my favorite writers. I let go of everything. I let him enter my brain, and I'm completely seduced. I let him lead me along. But then I encounter writers that I don't like at all. I'll mention one, it's probably not a good thing, but Steven Pinker. I don't like Steven Pinker. I find him really annoying, okay? But I force myself to try and find a way to be seduced by him, to let him into my brain, to see where he's coming from, to open myself to the possibility that he could be correct. So vulnerability, letting people into your mental space, is a form of intelligence. It's a kind of an emotional and an intellectual intelligence.
And forgive me for interrupting, but I think it also implies a level of confidence, because empathy or allowing oneself to be vulnerable to the point where you're seduced by something, by definition, if you're choosing to do it, implies that you also have the confidence that you can get back to yourself afterward.
Of course.
Right? That you're not going to get lost
Of
in the
course.
circumstances. That you're not going to be hijacked to the point of no return.
Right.
Or in some way that's detrimental to you.
That's right.
So it's I'm sounding really nerdy here. It's collinear with confidence in many ways. Sure, like take my mind and take it where you will, because I know I can come back at any time.
Right, right. And the same thing in a physical seduction, in a romantic sense, right? You're opening yourself up to the charm, to the energy of the other person. But if they start displaying dark energy and you see that they're abusive or something is wrong, you have the ability to retreat.
Well, there it gets tricky.
It gets very tricky.
Well, because the attachment systems, which are also rooted in childhood, oftentimes can overwhelm one's ability to recover oneself. How many? If I had $1 for every time someone that I knew in my life saying, I know they're bad for me, but I just can't. We just can't seem to disengage. Like that, you hear about that all the time. I mean, you see court cases about this that are public, and you just go, why didn't they just walk away from one another?
Of
Well,
course.
because once those attachment systems are locked in,
Yeah.
it almost becomes, and here metaphorically speaking, like a parent-child relationship. Like you can't suddenly decide your parents weren't your parents,
Right.
simply because you know better now. Right? You are
Right.
forever stricken with the reality that they were and they
Right.
had an influence. And I think that that attachment system is a force that tugs pretty hard.
Yeah, and a lot of women have written to me since The Art of Seduction, sort of saying that their boyfriend or husband was applying some of these tactics on them, and it was very painful, and they were kind of a little bit angry at me for it. But then they kind of realized that they didn't learn it really from my book. It was already kind of wired in them. But that reading about these tactics and these strategies actually helped them to recognize what their husband or boyfriend was doing to them, the manipulation and the games that were being played.
Do men write to you and talk about the seductive adornments that women have used to bring them into relationship as well? Or are you typically hearing from women?
I mostly hear from women complaining about men and how they've abused them and how they used some of the strategies. I don't deny have a slightly nefarious edge to them, because I didn't want to write a book about seduction that doesn't have that taboo element, because I say seduction involves the taboo, and I didn't want to censor myself.
But female to male seduction clearly also exists.
Very much so.
Less often, I acknowledge that it's less often is it physically abusive, but right. I mean, from an early age, both boys and girls, men and women, are coached by society on the sorts of seductive tactics and adornments, right? I mean, everything from makeup, perfume, hairstyles, cars, watches, jewelry, expression, power displays of any kind. I mean, that stuff, the world's filled with that stuff.
Yeah, but men are generally kind of happy when a woman seduces them, right? Unless they're after their money or something like that, which happens. But generally the sense, I talk about this in the first chapter about sirens, which I say is the quintessential archetype of the female seductress, the kind of half human, half bird creature on a rock singing so beautifully that you have to jump in the water and then they kill you. And so the idea is that men want to let go because men have to be so in control, so powerful. They have to project this image. They have a secret desire to let go and be almost dominated by a very powerful woman. A lot of men have that. And I talk about some of the most powerful men in history: Julius Caesar, Mark Antony, Joe DiMaggio, all these men, very masculine men who've fallen for very feminine, siren-like women and been completely dominated by them. And they actually kind of enjoy the process because it's like a sense of, I can let go. I can enter this totally sensual physical world, and it's extremely pleasing. It's like another realm outside of my kind of cold, masculine world, So I don't really get men complaining too much about women who've seduced them, honestly. It's usually the other way around.